dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your blessing and your leading and the things you want to teach us in the garden. And as we start this session, we just pray for your Spirit and your guidance. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so this one, the last one I'm doing is on starting transplants. And I think I'm a little less sure of this one because I'm not sure of all the resources you have here. But I do know you have a lot of the things. So I think it can be good information. And for many of you who are market gardening, this may be too basic. So I don't know. But if you're new at this or a home gardener, I think it can be helpful. So I have a quote here from Mrs. White: "The cultivation of the soil, the sowing of the seed, the care bestowed on the seed by the sower represent different stages of Christ's work for the soul. First appears the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear." So I have found the growing of transplants to be a very rich experience spiritually, to think about that plant as a child and the conditions you want to try to have for the child. You know, if you just kind of throw your seeds out there and say, "Good luck, I hope you do well," you're not going to have very good results. But if you start them in a nice protected environment and give them the very best conditions possible, you have a very good chance of having a healthy plant. So, many lessons. So just quickly, why use transplants? And again, I don't know where all of you are in this, so this may be obvious to you, but it lengthens your growing season. Does that make sense? If you plant, I don't know, when do you plant tomatoes here in Romania? June, May, June? May? Outside in May. But how old is that plant when you plant it? 2 months usually. 8 weeks old. So you've just added 2 months to your season. So that's a very good reason to use transplants. You know, for a market gardener, if you're growing very intensively, you want to make sure your bed is full. You don't want areas where there's nothing growing. And so transplants ensure that you're going to have a full bed with no skips. Whereas when you direct seed, you know, things happen. Plants, I mean, our experience, especially with beets, if I direct seed beets, sometimes you'll see them come up and then you go out and where did they go? They're gone. I think there's little bugs that love beets. And so now we transplant all our beets and we get a good stand. Helps you use your garden space more efficiently. So think about this with lettuce. For 1 month, your lettuce is in the greenhouse starting out. And then the second month it's in the garden, in the ground, and then it's harvested. But while that's in the ground, you've got other lettuce in your greenhouse that's a month old that you're going to put in. So do you get what I'm saying? You're optimizing your space, because in the case of lettuce, half the plant's life is in the greenhouse, and it goes into the garden half its maturity. I'm never sure, because you're so quiet, whether you understand what I'm saying or not. Or maybe you're saying, duh, this is obvious. Why don't you show us something more meaningful. A strong, healthy transplant is better able to withstand pests and disease. I think that's pretty obvious. But I'll give you a really good example. And I don't know how it is here. I know you all eat a lot of, you call it aubergine, right? We call it eggplant. I don't know why, but we do. I like aubergine better. But for us, we have a little bug. It's called the flea beetle. A little black bug. Do you have that? And they love eggplant, right? Do they? I mean, if it's a flea beetle that we have, they love eggplant. It's their favorite. So if I put out a transplant that big, the flea beetles will destroy it and kill it. But I've learned I get, big pots, and my eggplant, when I put them out, they're this big. And they can handle the flea beetles. The flea beetles will still eat little holes in the leaves, but it's not going to kill the eggplant. So that's just a simple example of how a strong, healthy transplant. This is a view of our greenhouse. I would say that is in March. We put our first tomatoes in the hoop house middle of March. So it's full of peppers and tomatoes. So why grow your own transplants? You can buy them from this man over here, so why would you grow them yourself? Well, you can save money, right? You can have more variety. At least for us, if you buy them at the store, there's only a few varieties they sell. But if you go to a catalog, like Johnny's catalog, they have many varieties. And you may say, I want to try this one and this one. Better quality. I think, and when I say I know that I'm cooperating with God, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm doing it, but God and I together can grow better quality transplants than you can buy in the store. And of course, you can grow and plant on your schedule, not when the stores have the plants. For us, we have a spring planting. We plant in the early spring, all our brassicas and our lettuces and all of that, carrots. And then, of course, we have our summer crops, and then we do our fall crops. But many times the stores don't have a lot of fall transplants, because for home gardeners, many times by fall they're like, oh, phooey, I'm tired of gardening till next year. But so we often get calls, do you have any extra transplants? So if you're growing them yourself, you can have them when you want them. And of course, it's fun. There's lots of lessons. You put that seed in and you water it every day, and soon you see it pop out of the ground. It's like, wow, how did it do that? I didn't make it grow. How did it grow? Does anybody know? Okay. So, from my experience and from talking to others, I think there's a few basic challenges of growing your own transplants. First one is, okay, I thought I had a different picture here. Spindly starts. They're tall and skinny and flopping over, and they look sad. You feel sorry for them. That's often a big problem. So raise your hand if you've ever had that problem. Okay, good. So that means we're speaking to the right group. Then the second problem is damping off. Do you know what that means? And I think I have some pictures, unless somehow I got an old slideshow here, but I think I've got pictures of that. That's where, the plant germinates and grows, and then one day you go out and it's just laying over, and it's rotted right at the soil. That's called, at least in U.S., we call it damping off. And then the last one is a lack of balanced fertility. So those, I think, so how many of you had damping off, where the plants come up and then they just die? Okay. So we know what I'm talking about here. So here's a picture of some leggy starts. Lots of stem. Why are they leggy? They're stretching for light. So it's a result from a lack of light. They're not getting enough light. Now, also, heat can make them more stretchy too, but almost always it's a lack of light. And this is the key for home gardeners, at least. Windowsills will never produce enough light. If you try to grow your plants in the windowsill, you're going to have leggy plants. That's just the bottom line. So you have to have more light. Now, this is where I'm not sure. I tried to do a little research. For us in the U.S., the simplest and cheapest solution is to use what we call fluorescent lights. They're long tubes. Do you know fluorescent lights? Do you have the tube ones? Okay, well, if you do, that's great, because that's the cheapest thing to do. We can buy shop lights 4 feet long, so a little over 1 meter long, for, the whole assembly for $15. And you need to have 2 of those, because each one takes 2 tubes. So we need 4 tubes over our trays. So 4 tubes will cover 4 trays. And I don't know how big your trays are here. Ours are 10 inches by 20 inches. So that would be 12 centimeters by I don't know. My brain is too tired to. You said 10 by 20? 10 by 20. 25 by 50 centimeters. Okay. How big are your standard trays here? 30 by 50. Okay, so that's not too different. Maybe a little wider. Okay. So still, I think 4 fluorescent tubes should cover that if you have them this way. Now, so this is what I've always used, is the fluorescent lights, but now everybody is going to LED lights. And I think they're better, but they tend to be more expensive. And so you have to just do your own research and figure out what's the best thing. The nice thing about LEDs is, of course, they should have a much longer life, although fluorescents can have a very long life too. But LEDs, I think, are brighter, so the lights can be up higher. But again, at this point, they're quite expensive still, I think. What was that? The LEDs, yes. The LEDs more closely mimic, I think, the sun's rays. So once the seeds have germinated, many seeds, of course, things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, you need to have on a heat mat or something to give them extra heat for germination. But then once they've germinated, you can cut back on the temperature some. It doesn't have to be as warm, and that will also help them from stretching more. But the big key here is more light. And so obviously if you're growing in a greenhouse, if you have a greenhouse, then hopefully you should have more light. But if you have a long stretch of cloudy weather in the spring when you're trying to start your transplants, even a greenhouse may not have enough light to give really healthy transplants. But they'll be okay. Okay, here's a picture of damping off. You know that picture? So, what causes damping off? It's nice when the solutions are so simple. Damping off is caused by a number of soil-borne fungal diseases. In fact, it can many times it will kill the plant before it even comes out of the ground. So you don't even know what happened. You think it's bad seed or something, but it's just damping off, getting the seed before it has a chance to show its head. So the main cause, and again, I would say 90% of the time, it's overwatering. You're watering the plants too much. A secondary issue can be lack of proper air circulation. But again, if somebody calls me and says, "What do I do? My plants are my little seedlings are dying," I would tell them, cut back on the watering. There's a saying, something about killed by love or something like that. You're taking too good a care of them. You're watering them too much. It's good actually if the soil dries out a little bit between waterings, at least on the surface. You don't want it soggy wet. Does that make sense? And of course, along with this, with the overwatering, is poor soil drainage. What are you using for your soil medium? If you're just using garden soil, well, number one, chances are those disease organisms are going to be in the soil. And number two, if that soil is at all heavy clay kind of soil, it's not going to drain well enough to give healthy seedlings. And then this is another big one in the spring, is cool soil temperatures. And as I said before, it can affect both seeds and seedlings. So what are the solutions here? Here's another plant. You see a taller, a bigger tomato plant that it hasn't actually killed it, but that will never be a well, I shouldn't say never. Never say never, but chances are that will not be a healthy plant. One nice thing about tomatoes, as you know, if you kind of lay them down, they can grow more roots off the stem. So that one could survive with proper care. So I really recommend using a soilless And again, I don't know exactly what you have readily available here, but soilless peat or core-based potting mix. You know, a lot of people think, you know what core is, C-O-I-R? It's made from coconut husks that they grind up, and it makes something very similar to peat moss, and some people think it's superior, but you know, it's coming from far away, and the other thing I've heard about it, depending on the quality of the production, it can have a lot of salts in it because coconuts grow by the ocean usually, and I've heard of growers having issues with that. But Christian, is potting mix available readily here for, I mean, like a peat-based potting mix?
We do have some.
I mean, is that what you start your plants in?
Only peat moss.
Okay.
Something like sometimes.
Yeah.
Is it enough for nutrition?
Well, no, not just peat moss. So we buy an organic potting mix that will have mainly peat moss, but some perlite. So you know what perlite is? White. And that helps with drainage and everything. And then it also has a small fertilizer, an organic fertilizer charge in it. And for us, it lasts quite well. So we already talked about letting the soil dry out between waterings, and then keep plants warm. These disease organisms thrive under 10 degrees Celsius. Now, I'm not sure if that's right. I think I calculated that wrong. 50 degrees, is that 10? Okay. Yeah, so this can be a problem in the spring. It's a problem for us because our water is very cold. So if I'm watering the plants with really cold water, you're creating an environment where these disease organisms can thrive better. So try to figure out a way to preheat your water a little bit. Obviously, you don't want it hot, but, you know, above 10. And if you do all those other things and you're still having problems, then just get a little fan that you can blow over your plants, and that can help. And I will mention one product, and I did enough research to know that it is available in Europe. I don't know how easily it is available. But Actinovate is a product, you know, I would much rather not use products. I'd rather just use the environmental manipulations to get healthy plants. But if you're having real issues with damping off or any other soil-borne diseases, Actinovate is actually I can't remember the exact name of it. It's a bacteria, a beneficial bacteria that you can spray on the soil or drench with a watering can. And it is very effective from my experience. Preemptively. You know what I mean by that? In other words, you have to apply it before you see the problem, proactively. If you wait until your plants are dying and then use it, it may not work. So, you know, I wouldn't want to have to rely on it, but if you have issues and you're trying, you know, again, the key is getting your soil healthy enough that these disease organisms aren't going to thrive in the soil. But that doesn't always happen overnight. Okay, the last one, lack of balanced fertility, obviously can cause issues. So again, for here, I would just say use a professional potting mix, find a nursery that's doing it and say, what are you using? And you just do what he does and buy the same stuff. Never skimp on container size, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But, if you're trying to grow a big plant in a small container, you're going to have fertility issues unless you're dousing it with lots of additional fertility. Don't overwater. The more you water, the more you're going to leach out any fertility in there. So again, that's another good reason for not overwatering. And then make sure you're transplanting at the right time. And this is pretty easy to figure out. You can see with plants, they're just thriving, and then at some point they stop growing and they're going to start going backwards. They're going to start looking yellow, and you've waited too long. You want to plant them just at the point where they've reached the right size, and for us, with the way we do it, that's usually 3 to 4 weeks old for most plants. Or either you're transplanting or you're potting on. So for tomatoes, when they get this big, they go to a bigger pot. And then, of course, the roots have more room to grow and they've got more fertility in the soil there. So that's covering the basics of what I see are your main issues. Light, which lack of light causes spindly transplants, damping off, and lack of fertility. So the rest of the time, unless there's any questions here, we're going to focus on the specific system that we use. Not saying you have to use it, but we love it. So any questions on any of the things we've talked about so far?
Just a quick question. You mentioned here the use of professional potting mix. Sometimes I've noticed that these products that we buy on the stores, they have some chemical products that are actually not beneficial for the plants.
Okay, so yeah, I should have been a little more specific on that. So the question was on the potting mix. We use a professional organic potting mix, and I don't know how readily that would be available. But yes, we're no longer certified organic because we didn't like the way our government was getting involved with it and telling us how to grow our plants. So we're not certified organic, but we want to be able to tell our customers that we use organic practices. So we only buy organic potting mix. Okay, any other questions there?
Do you use worm castings?
Do we use worm castings? We have used worm castings. They're very good. For many, many years, we made our own potting mix. And, I can give you recipes for that if you want. But it's very labor intensive. It's a lot of work. And we were using, for the fertilizer in the potting mix, we were using blood meal for nitrogen. And we decided we wanted to move away from blood meal. And we were never able to find a good substitute, something that gave consistent results. I can tell you blood meal works great in a potting mix, and we were never able to find something else that had the same consistent results. So for that reason, but really bigger, the time-saving reasons, we went to a professional potting mix. It's more expensive. It's certainly cheaper to make your own. But yeah, I mean, worm castings can work well in a potting mix. But I don't think, are you talking about just straight worm castings? Or we used half and half. We used buckets, round plastic buckets this big. You have those? I mean, they're 5 gallons. I don't know if you have something similar here. But we would use 3 buckets of peat moss and 3 buckets of worm castings and 1 bucket of perlite. And then a mix of fertilizer that was 1 cup of blood meal. Well, this was the ratio of the fertilizer. We used 2 cups of the fertilizer, but the fertilizer blend was equal parts blood meal, green sand, and soft rock phosphate. But I don't know that you have green sand and soft rock phosphate available. Blood meal was for nitrogen, the soft rock phosphate, of course, for phosphorus, and the green sand was for potassium and micronutrients. And so you would mix that and then use 2 cups of that in the mix. And it worked very well, as good as any professional potting mix. But again, we got away from it. Okay, can you speak up a little?
Yeah, in place of blood meal, one thing we found online, we bought a big bag in. It's organic, it's a soybean based. It had soybean, some sort of coconut.
Yeah, it was also veganic, so it didn't have any.
Totally veganic, yeah.
Any animal inputs.
Okay.
We added that to our tomato potting mix because they need a lot of nitrogen and stuff. So
but it's something that
you can get it.
Okay, good. So they're saying they found a soybean meal, organic soybean meal mix. Yeah, our challenge in America is all our nitrogen sources are becoming genetically modified. So soybeans are mostly genetically modified, cottonseed meal. We've used peanut meal, which worked well, but again, we didn't seem to have the consistency with it that the blood meal was. Okay, so let's move on here. This ends at 4:15, is that right? Or 4? The next session starts at 4:50. Okay, so I need to hurry. Oh, so it is 4:15. Okay, well, we're good then. So, we love soil blocks. Are you all familiar with soil blocks? It's a European thing. The soil block makers are made in England. In fact, I have a web address here for you. And Elliot Coleman, who I've talked about in previous sessions, he's the one that sold us on this. In his book, The New Organic Grower, which is another book I would recommend for anyone who is wanting to do this on a commercial scale. It's one of our main textbooks for our internship program on the farm. The New Organic Grower. Have you read it? It's just a good primer on market gardening. but he goes into quite a lot of detail as to why soil blocks produce better transplants. And I can say from personal experience and from experimentation that soil blocks make the highest quality transplants of anything I've ever used or seen used. We did a tour of all the top market gardens in the Northeast. You know, we went to Elliot Coleman's place, we went to Jean-Martin Fortier's place, we went to Connor Crickmore's place, we went to Ben Hartman's place. And Elliot Coleman was the only one using soil blocks, and his transplants were the best, hands down, compared to any other farm we went to. So I'm totally convinced that they make the healthiest transplants. Now, the question is, do they need to be that healthy? Most market gardeners would say, yeah, okay, they do make the best transplants, but it's too labor intensive. It's not efficient enough. And I would agree with that, you know, because the soil blocker we use, we have a number of different ones actually, but it will make 12 or 20 blocks, the main ones we use. So, you know, you're pushing it into the soil, then you're scraping it off, and then you're putting it in your tray and popping it out. You know, whereas with plug trays, you just put the soil in and kind of push it around, and you're done. So I would agree that it's not as labor efficient as using, I mean, is that what you normally use, a plug tray? You know, 50 count or 70 count or whatever. And so most market gardeners would say it's good enough. You know, you have to make that decision yourself. So soil blocks, because of the shape, they have more volume. Usually plug trays are kind of this shape. And so just the volume of the soil block gives the roots a much better head start. There's less root shock because they're what they call air pruned. The roots go to the edge and they're like, wait, there's nothing out there. We'll just kind of stay here, you know. Whereas in a plug tray, the roots go to the edge and they're like, you know, I can't go out this way. So then they start doing this kind of thing. And you get root circling. And then when you pull that plant out of the plug tray, it's like, you know, the roots are totally in shock. What is going on? I can't believe this. What are they doing? And so you have what's called root shock. And the soil blocks largely avoid that. Because, and again, you have to plant them at the right time, because eventually they'll start growing into the blocks next to them. But if you plant them at the right time, you put them in the ground and man, they are off and running. And it's a modular system. I hope you can see that from here. You can start them in these very small 2-centimeter blocks. And those are really, how many of you use soil blocks? Okay, so there's a few that do. The little ones are very good for starting your tomatoes and peppers. Well, we're going to talk about that in just a minute here. But then those can just be put directly into the 5-centimeter ones. And then those can go into the 10-centimeter one. So for potting on, it's really nice. It's simple. Now again, the soil block makers are not cheap. But once you have them, I'm still using my original soil block maker after 22 years. I figure it's made millions of soil blocks. Okay, there's the website, soilblockers.co.uk. It's interesting. I was just looking it up because the man who invented them, Michael Ladbrook, I guess was getting old and wanted to sell the business off. So there are a couple sisters, or maybe actually 3 sisters and a brother that bought the business and are carrying it on. And so this is the quote I like to think about. And again, I'm not trying to stand up here and say everybody needs to use soil blocks. That's your choice. But this quote is good. In the cultivation of the soil, the thoughtful worker will find that treasures little dreamed of are opening up before him. No one can succeed in agriculture or gardening without attention to the laws involved. The special needs of every variety of plant must be studied. Different varieties require different soil and cultivation, and compliance with the laws governing each is the condition of success. The attention required in transplanting that not even a root fiber shall be crowded or misplaced. So that's my argument for soil blocking. The way the soil blocks grow, the root fibers are not going to be crowded or misplaced. The care of the young plants, the pruning and watering, the shielding from frost at night and sun by day, keeping out weeds, disease, and insect pests, the training and arranging not only teach important lessons concerning the development of character, but the work itself is a means of development. In cultivating carefulness, patience, attention to detail, obedience to law, it imparts a most essential training. Do you all understand the word essential? What does essential mean? Crucial. Essential doesn't mean, what's the word I'm thinking of? Yeah, it's not an optional thing. It's essential. It's necessary. Did you learn that in school? Yes? You did? The School of Christ or in your formal schooling? I mean, I didn't learn that in school, even though I went to a good school, a satellite school of Madison, but they didn't teach me this. But it's essential. Okay, so I'll just go into this a little bit more, and again, you can do with it what you want. This is actually pictures taken at Elliot Coleman's place. So here are some of his little babies. And these are on a heat mat, that red heat mat there. So he's starting basil there and tomatoes, and it looks like maybe some peppers. I can't really see very well, but the beauty of those mini ones is you can grow a lot of plants in a small space. So you can just have your heat mat and have it somewhere where it's not going to get cold and start a lot of plants. Now, this is one place, usually when I disagree with Elliot Coleman, I'm wrong. I've learned that. But this is one place where, from my own experience, he says just put the seed on top of the soil block and it'll do fine. From my experience, if you just put the seed on top, you get a lot of funky transplants. In other words, a lot of strange, they kind of grow funny. I don't know how to say it exactly. They don't just grow up, kind of. So I say, what I used to do was push them down individually, like with a ballpoint pen or something, just push them down into the soil, but that's kind of labor intensive. So then I just started covering the soil lightly, and I feel like it works a lot better. And then the key is they can't stay in those 2-centimeter blocks for long at all. As soon as they germinate, you need to pot them on. So then the next size up is what is they call a 3.8 centimeter block. And these are, the stand-up blocker will do 20 at a time. And we use these for lettuce and chicory. You know what I mean by chicories? The chicory family. Scallions, we'll put about 12 scallions in a block. Scallions are the pencil onions. And so they just grow all in the block, and then you just put the block in the garden, and they mature together, and then just pull up the whole thing, and you've got your bunch of scallions. Kale and collards, we start in that size. Beets, we put 2 seeds in each block, and each beet seed can be multiple plants, right? So we're trying to end up with 3 or 4 beets per block. And then they just push each other apart in the garden. That's another thing he talks about is multi-plant blocks. So rather than planting 1 beet with each block, that's a lot of labor, and you plant them closer. So just have 3 or 4 beets per block, and you plant them a little further apart, and then they just grow out, but you can be cultivating around them much easier. Kohlrabi, do you know kohlrabi? Okay. Spinach, and spinach will do like 4 seeds in a block. And then the next size up is the 5-centimeter block. See, this is a hand one here. You can buy these, and you can either buy one that does 4 5-centimeter blocks or 5 3.8 centimeter blocks. And those are not expensive. I mean, at least relatively speaking. In the States, they cost about $30. So I would think here they would probably be cheaper as long as England is part of the EU, right? So get them quick. So notice in this one here, you've got a 2-centimeter square there. So those little ones just drop in there. Really simple. But you can also get, let's see. I'm trying to see. I don't know if I have a good picture, but normally they would just have a little plastic dibble in them. So it's just making a little depression in the top of the block that you drop your seeds in. So you can interchange and either have this block shape or just... And then they also, I didn't even include it in here, but for market gardeners, they have... I don't remember what size that is in centimeters. We call it a 3-inch blocker. But there's just 6 of them that you do at a time. And we use those for cucumbers, for squash, and also for transplanting tomatoes. later in the season. You just go straight from the 2 centimeter block to that big one. It's about this big, something like that. So the 5 centimeter block we use for all our brassicas except the kale and collards. Potting on tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, celery, parsley. And you also can start cucumbers and squash in them with this 2 centimeter insert if you don't have the bigger blocker. Fennel. So now here, and Elliot has done this as well, but the big blocker, the 10 centimeter blocker, is very labor intensive if you're doing hundreds of tomatoes or peppers. To do one at a time. It makes a very, very healthy transplant with this soil block. I mean, you just have a beautiful, beautiful transplant. But it's too labor intensive, so we went to pots for so we start the tomatoes in the 2-inch block, pot them on to the, not the 2 centimeter block, pot them on to the 5 centimeter block, and then on to the 10 centimeter block. And really in 6 weeks, you can have a big, healthy transplant. Okay. We're almost through here. So, of course, we use those for tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cucumbers in the early spring, and squash. Later in the season, we do cucumbers and squash in the smaller one. But for the first ones, you want the head start. And so we put them in the big ones. And, the cucumbers are this big when we put them out. Okay, I'm almost done, and then don't forget to harden off your transplant. So again, if these are your babies in the greenhouse, these are your children that you've taken such good care of, then you don't just take them straight from the greenhouse to the world and say, all the best, au revoir, right? There's a hardening off process that goes on. So you'll take them out for a couple hours on the first day and get them used to the environment. Then you bring them back in at night, and the next day a little more. To be honest, most commercial growers don't baby them too much, but the more you baby them, the better chance of success. Okay, in closing, he who gave the parable of the tiny mustard seed is the sovereign of heaven, and the same laws that govern earthly seed sowing and reaping govern the sowing of the seeds of truth. So, if that's true, and we believe it is true because it was inspired, then we can learn a lot about evangelism in the garden, right? Isn't that amazing? Okay, questions?
Why do we transplant? Why can't we just put who we've always wanted? Why can't we just put a seed in the destination pot?
So why do you pot on rather than just start them in a big pot? Okay, well, there's a number of reasons I could give. There may be others, but number one, if that seed doesn't germinate well, you've just kind of wasted a lot of potting mix. Second, I think I've read from Elliot Coleman that I do know this, at each stage you can do some culling, and I haven't figured out the spiritual applications of that yet. But when in the 2 centimeter blocks, all the ones that aren't looking really healthy, you just kind of put them back on the compost pile. And same in the in the 5 centimeter blocks, you can kind of say, I'm not sure about that one. So it's, can we say survival of the fittest? Wheat in the tares. But then I've also heard that it actually produces a stronger transplant. And I don't know for sure if that's the case, but those I think are a few reasons for potting on. And then, as I said, just the space, for starting those warm weather crops. Think about if you were starting them in a big pot. Number one, how do you keep that whole volume of soil warm enough? And it would take a huge amount of space. I mean, when we've got 500 tomato plants in their big pots, that's a lot of space. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Did you have issues with the quality of water? As I did, the plants weren't doing very well, the flowers.
Okay, quality of water. Yeah, that's a whole nother issue that can be a problem. We're blessed in that, I don't even want to tell you because you'll be jealous. We have our own spring on the farm, and we own the whole watershed. So there's no contaminants coming into the spring. And the spring is up the valley, so it's all gravity flow water to the farm. So we have the perfect water setup. The Lord knew we couldn't handle too many things at once, and so he gave us that one. But yeah, quality of water. And in fact, we have a young friend, Alan Seiler, who is doing a lot of research in the western U.S. I don't think it would be a problem here, but there's a lot of they have a lot of high pH water that's too high, and so he's actually developed. Other people have developed, but he's trying to come up with a cheap, what's called a sulfur burner, that using sulfur, you can lower the pH of the water. So, it's a whole science, and if he was here, he could talk to you about it for hours. He's a scientist. But yeah, and of course, that's just, the pH is just one thing. Then there's, toxic chemicals and who knows what else. So yeah, it can be an issue. We're just blessed that it's not an issue for us. Okay, here and here, and then we better stop.
I was just asking, I'd like to ask, when you do this mix for those plots, do you use this regular professional substrate you buy?
Yeah, we've found it works great with any professional potting mix. The key, and I didn't really talk about this, is you have to make the mix very, very wet. Very wet, because you're pushing this thing into it until the water seeps out the top, and then you're putting it in. And the beauty of it is it can't get over wet because there's nothing to hold the water in. The excess water just drains out. But when you make it, that's the biggest mistake most people do with it. They don't get the mix wet enough. Okay. I think this is the last question, but you can ask me afterwards.
Here, if we use the soil from the forest, do you think that's okay?
The soil from the forest, I have heard, in fact, Elliot Coleman says that really well decomposed leaves can make a good substitute for peat moss. I've never actually experimented with that myself, but I think it.
The seeds from the forest.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah, you might have seeds in there. But I think, at some point we're not going to be able to buy these things, right? So it's good to be looking for alternatives. Yeah. So just well broken down forest litter, I guess you could say. Okay, well, thank you. That concludes the marathon. But I think next, I'm not sure, is Judy, how do you say? Are you next? Okay. So let's just pray. Dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for the lessons you have to teach us in the garden, and especially the lessons from starting plants. The many lessons we can apply to parenting, to child rearing, to evangelism. Teach us, I pray, and draw us closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen.